Hi there, my name is Adriel,
And my name is Yan Ping.
and this is the Teo-logy podcast. So, Yanping, where are we really
Ooh, we're at the final episode of our Teo-logy podcast
for the year?
Yeah, and we're going to use this episode to look back at what we have done so far for the year and what we have learned through doing this podcast.
Yeah, and before we get there, I think we want to do a quick recap on why Teo-logy podcast exists. So maybe Yanping give us a quick idea why it exists.
When we first talked about doing a podcast, it was because we were moving to Johor. So we were trying to think of like activities to do or hobbies to help us assimilate into Johor. And having a podcast kind of pushes you to go out and experience things so that when you come back, you have something to talk about. So that was, kind of the genesis of the podcast. Apart from that, it was also a good tool to just keep in touch with friends and family who are away when we moved out. Especially because during the first few episodes, right, it's covering a lot of FAQs that we found ourselves having to answer a lot. Like, why are you moving to Johor? Why are you moving to Johor? Why are you moving to Johor? Or like, what do you do for a living? So that kind of questions. Those were the objectives that we started out with the podcast.
And I find that we have evolved in the sense where Yimping and I, we always talk about as almost everything under the sun, from every issue, every topic, every policy, whatever there is to talk about. And we realize when we meet up with friends, they also tend to discuss the same things. So I also sort of caught on that, maybe having these thoughts out there would aid in conversations and perspective. That was the idea. That's why we have episodes like how my wife screamed at me, and the idea of fighting well and what we do. Yeah.
Which was in line with a season where we were journeying with quite a few couples too.
Yeah. So maybe I'll start us off with the first thing we have learned. Yeah. Is the technicalities of running a podcast. So to give a quick disclaimer first, this is my fourth podcast. Yeah.
So you've done quite a few podcasts like for work and then also a bit more for fun under Malaysian Christian Talks.
Yeah, and each has their own purpose. So for back when I was in MCKL, I did a podcast called GGWP. Then in FES also I momentarily did a podcast, and then with Malaysian Christian Talks also, which is on the hiatus now. That was the season. And for each, it was a learning process, but the most of the technicalities came in this particular podcast, the culmination of it all. And I start first. I think it's the technicalities is you come to realize that it's not just about having a good camera, good lighting, which is still something that we are learning lah, and color grading, and it is a lot of work. What about you?
Yeah, I think he really started rabbit holing a lot more with this podcast. Of course, as he mentioned, it wasn't such a steep learning curve, right? Because he has done it before, but the information that he shared with me, that was also new for me. So for example, having lights at the back so that your screen doesn't look 2D, right? You don't look flat.
Yeah.
And I remember when we were talking about the podcast, our landlord said like, oh, you can turn on the light. And we're like, no, we don't want that kind of light because we don't want the light to shine everywhere, right? You want it to be kind of dark and then you have a backlight.
And a field light.
Yeah, and then a
key
light
light,
that only illuminates your face. So that kind of thing, that was quite new for me and quite fascinating to learn.
And even as we're speaking now, while we have upgraded our equipment, the lighting is still something that we're still working on. We only have one sort of a softbox light, and even then, it's a cheap one lah. Yeah.
But yeah, I had to learn like what is a softbox. It doesn't look soft at all.
Yeah. And seeing I'm the one with all the technical skills, I mean, Yamping can edit video, sure. It is a lot of work. Someone that you have to do it regularly.
Yeah.
Once every 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think that's something that I learned too, like just watching him do things. Because for me, I just sit here and talk for half an hour and then I'm done. But he has to do a lot of the back end work.
Yeah, so as you realize how I've done this whole room is quite automated already, where I flick the switch and everything is on, and all I have to do is just adjust the settings on the camera, which is just an iPhone 13, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, but the second thing I think in terms of technicalities is actually the marketing side. So like how do you create thumbnails? How do you do catchy phrases for your, how your thumbnail wording should be different from your YouTube title. I don't think we've quite figured that out, and in a sense, we don't really need to because we don't need to go viral.
Yeah, we
But
don't.
it's just fun to learn
Experiment.
that. Yeah, there's actually a lot of thought that goes behind these kind of things.
Correct. So like when you put words like Johor inside, the views will go up. Or when you put like the top three things, or you do contrast tensions like from Pentecostal to Presbyterian. So these are the ones that did.
Yeah.
Then the ones that didn't do well was like couples game night. Like no
Yeah.
one is interested to hear. The thumbnail was wrong because I thought that was a very interesting episode because the game night was like cards prompted us to ask questions about ourselves, which would be interesting lah. But I guess
Yeah. Yeah, but the final thing I would say on like the technicalities is when you do a regular podcast, you learn that this is not going to be the first podcast you do and not the last one, right? So
Yeah.
then you tend to chill a bit more. If you didn't edit things perfectly, it's also fine. There's
Yep.
always going to be the next episode. You
Yep.
didn't say things properly, there's always be the next episode. So yeah, that helps.
Yep. Okay, so the second thing, what do you think you have realized upon doing Teo-logy podcast?
Yeah, it is something that we didn't expect, which is the podcast kind of turned into a calling card. Calling card by which, it's an introduction to us. And I think it's because of the context that we just moved to a new place. So when we are getting to know people and people ask us about ourselves, we'll just like, oh, here's our podcast. And sorry. And also, there are people who just stumbled across our podcast because we moved to Johor, and then they got in touch with us or got to know us. So that was a pleasant surprise for me.
Yeah, I think for me also was in the context of calling card, having people come back with feedback. Like, oh, Adriel, when you said this, what were your thoughts on this? Or when you said that, that was very interesting. It was convicting. So it is a good social feedback. Does give me dopamine shots in my head. But I think main point is I am grateful that I know that to a certain extent that this podcast provides value. Yeah.
But probably some episodes more than others.
Sure. Because other than that is some episodes, if you want to tune in lah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think the third point, more brief, but I think is something that we realize is scripting or writing down our thoughts first
Yeah.
before saying anything. Yeah,
Yeah.
like this also we had to write down our thoughts.
Yeah. So maybe just to share, I had a friend who asked like, how do you script your podcasts? Do you like write line by line or do you jot down points? How would you respond to that?
Points. Yeah. We only read unless like the previous episode on the preaching one, we had to read a certain script as to not go off topic. But most of the times what you're seeing now is just we are just talking lah.
Yeah.
But we do have points to be a guiding system lah, signposting.
Yeah, so that you kind of know where you want to end. So we had like a starting phrase and an ending phrase so that we know when each other wants to end.
Yeah.
We also know our milestones that we want to hit, the main points. But then the middle is more free flow. So like I can jump in and ask him questions or like, interject with a thought.
Yeah.
But it also helps you to be concise with what you say and reduce your like a little bit.
Yeah, and how authentic is when Yamping goes, oh, on that note, that kind of thing. And then I want to ask a question, so so we're not scripted.
Yeah.
And so for that, what's our final? Yeah.
Final one. Don't know whether we expected it, but it also is a pleasant thing to receive, which is the topics that we brought up. Some of them helped us to create conversations with people that we might not have expected to. So I think, for example, talking a lot about Johor helped me with my work context, like just talking with colleagues or even teachers in the education scene in Johor. And then they would then recommend different foods for me, different places to go. So that was quite fun. Or even saying like, oh, let's hang out someday. So that's one. A more deeper level of topics also struck a chord with some people. So we mentioned previously like the couple fights one, right? So that helped us to have different conversations with some
Yeah,
couples.
you're right. You're right.
Yeah, and also the quite recent one, the sermon rubric one, had some good conversations with some people as well. So yeah, it was a pleasant, don't know whether you call it surprise, but something to receive where when you bring up a topic, then people are like, oh, you also want to talk about it, let's talk about it.
Yeah, my two key moments was the one came up to me and says, Adro, when you said make discipleship a norm, not a privilege, struck her, and she wants to see whether this is something she can bring back to her own church to do. I was very encouraged by something when you draw out from the Bible, which is very clear, and it flows through. The other one is someone messaged me. It's like Adriel, yeah, my pastor asked whether I know you, and I said yes, because he stumbled upon your podcast on introducing the different churches, and then he's like, why didn't mention the name of the church? Why didn't you come to my church to promote? And I was like, oh, cool. So it has gone 1 degree away also. Yeah, I haven't met the person yet, and then they have already come on call. So these are open doors lah. Yeah.
And like some friends that we made along the way, so people that watched our podcast first almost before like meeting us face to face, and then they came to our house and they were like, oh, that's the couch, we want to take photo with the couch.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
our couch is more famous than us.
Yeah. Which we told our landlord, the couch is a celebrity now.
Yeah.
Then he threw the couch away.
We got new couches, but those are fun bits about the podcast.
Yeah, I think so. With that, I think that's the tail end. But before we end, we want to take this moment to thank you for actually wanting to actually tune in and to listen to us, all you 118 subscribers. And I think we would like to end this moment with what are your hopes looking forward ahead for the year 2025? Yeah.
Honestly, it was quite hard for me to answer this question. When we thought about like, what do you want to expect for the next year? I think a lot of it is just building momentum and just keep going. But a lot of things, I feel this rhythm works for us. So, posting things on a bi-weekly basis. Each episode is about 20 to 30 minutes long. And then using it as a platform to talk about a topic that happens in our current life or is something that we're thinking about or going through. And in general, we just talk, right? So it's almost like just talking and then sticking a camera in front when we're talking. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, looking forward to next year is there one thing that's mulling over my thought is whether to create a certain toolkit that's under Teo-logy, like a form of merchandise, but it's a toolkit for couples to talk. That is playing in my head lah. Yeah, but I think on a podcast basis, I would like to think looking ahead is I want to find more hidden gems in the conversations that people are always talking about, and we would like to share it with others, kind of thing. Yeah. So the one good example was the previous topic on the 3 problems in Malaysian preaching. When our friend showed us that rubric, right, we were like, okay, it's not. He calls it a grading scale. Sorry, we call it a rubric. And we were like, okay, this is cool. We want to talk about it lah. And these are the kind of things that I'm hoping to stumble upon. Yeah. So that's mine.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you hope our listeners get out of it?
I think what they get out of it is perspective. Number one, it'd be cool if you can end up, meeting them face to face, real life, and just have conversations on the whole podcast process and all that. But I would like to think the first thing is to be able to bring them the kata di bawah tempurung. It'll be the kind of process of membuka itu tempurung. Yeah.
I think for me, it's just sharing life and sharing how couples talk. Yeah.
So in that sense, modeling it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I guess that's it for now.
This is the Teo-logy podcast.
Till next time.
Bye.
Bye.